Ah, hola, hola. ¿Me oyes aquí? Sí. Pa, 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 pa. Vale, está guay, Samu.
Vale, ¿y tenemos algún bolsillo? ¿Lo ponemos a la cintura, si no?
Para la cintura é melhor. O bolsillo é falso bolsillo.
En el pantalón.
É como está nuestro ministro. ¿Está
Ya
mejor?
vea,
¿Está
yo
bien?
vivo preparada para estas
Qué
cosas.
bueno.
¿Ah?
Le conté que
No
mi padre,
tengo
mi madre,
problema.
mi hermano están todos de COVID también.
Ah, pues sí, dos cosas en 5
Que
minutos.
salió en Brasil, en jornal, que Argentina se prepara para la cuarta onda. Y nosotros también. Estaba en la parte de frente de uno de los periódicos más conocidos.
Empezando desde la izquierda, 1, 2, 3.
También.
¿Y Feliz no ha llegado?
Ok, lo voy a guardar.
Llámalo y dile que ya estamos listos para empezar.
Sí, yo necesito de mis notas acá. Esto yo necesito.
Pues le podemos poner 4.
Espera.
Bueno, ustedes nos organizan. Yo soy puesto 2.
2, correcto. 2 empezando desde
A
la
ver.
izquierda.
O sea que es Félix, Sandra, ¿qué hay? ¿Cierto? Félix, Sandra, Dolly y los otros 2.
Ok,
Sí.
Félix, yo.
Ajá,
¿Tú?
luego yo
¿Quién más?
soy.
¿Quién son los dos otros?
Ahí ya llegó alguien más que es un señor. Infinitamente grande. No, mentira. Ya no me va a tomar el pelo.
Perfecto.
Suiza es el de la movilidad. Tengo un proyecto para que sea lo pedido. Ya lo dije yo que participa en la universidad.
Tendrá que ser en un lateral, si no al
Ya.
quitarte se
No,
se separa. Te lo pongo al cinturón, si no.
Sí, dale. Buen día. Hola.
Uno se prepara para 10 minutos y lo ponen a hablar en 5. Y entonces ya en 5 puede decir la mitad. Uno se prepara para 10, luego le toca hablar en 5, y luego dice una sola cosa.
Creo que tengo que ir después al otro.
Es verdad.
10:30.
Sí, más o
11.
menos eso.
Ah, bueno. Bueno, yo
¿Cómo
también
está
estaba que
usted?
tenía que
Bien,
hablar.
mucho gusto. Tanto gusto. Buen día.
Secretario. Aunque no tengas, vas a ver igual.
Esta era con las catalanas, ¿no?
De la derecha.
¿Cómo le va? Encantada. Ah, muy
Hola, buenos
bien.
días. ¿Cómo está?
Y después cerramos agenda.
Bien, pues aquí.
Ah, sí.
¿Qué tal?
Ah, usted es dueño de las cataratas.
Cierre quiero estar.
Y usted es dueño de las
voy el sábado
cataratas.
mañana
Qué
a Madrid.
delicia. Ay, sí.
A la orden, a la orden.
Ah, en Iguazú, sí, claro.
El tema
Sí,
se
es
llama
una
Conocimiento,
delicia.
para el tema
Guerrero.
para el conocimiento del título.
¿Cómo está usted?
Qué bueno.
Así que lo veo,
Ah,
me
muchas
voy.
gracias. Me encanta conocerlo.
Rector de la Iberoamericana. Luis Arriaga. Así.
Bueno, no sé si está activa ya la megafonía, ¿no? Sí, me estoy escuchando. Muy buenos días.
Good morning. Good morning, one and all. Thank you for coming along to attend this morning's session on the Iberoamerican knowledge space in the futures of higher education. I wear two hats. I'm the director and the coordinator of the Iberoamerican knowledge space and the Iberoamerican University, Secretary General of Iberoamerican University. It really is an honor to have the roster of speakers that we have with us this morning. I think that they give us an excellent reflection of political and academic cooperation. That is something that characterizes all of our efforts within the Iberoamerican knowledge space. It's a very constructive approach. It reflects the different ways of thinking and acting in all of our individual countries. But by working through governments and institutes of higher learning, we are able to make great strides together. And today's panel illustrates that to a T. Now, you all know how consultation processes and cooperation processes unfold in each one of these countries. And the amazing thing is how everybody manages to sing in choir when all of these things seem to be aligning, from the basic fundamentals and many policies as well. And sometimes there's tensions, but without tension, there is no energy to propel us ever forward. So I think that all of these different processes of cooperation between higher education and governments is essential, and it's something that we wanted to shed light on in this panel. I will perhaps make a brief introduction for each one of our speakers before we kick off the discussion. Another purpose of this meeting this morning is to think about our shared capacity for work. That's really something that's characterized all of our joint efforts in the past and going forward as well. I will give the floor first to the Secretary of Higher Education Policies of Argentina, Oscar Barta. The idea for this roundtable discussion is that we'll have a first part where each one of these speakers will make a general presentation on the topic. They will be improvising. They'll be speaking freely. That's the idea here. We all want to have a free exchange. And then afterwards, I will put a question to each one of them, ones that I've picked out of the hat. I'll ask you about some of the issues that you've raised in your talks. And then we'll move on to the next speakers. And then at the end, we will open the floor for questions and answers and interaction with the audience. So thank you, Oscar. Go ahead. Thank you, Felix. Good morning, everybody. Fellow panelists. As Felix was just saying, we have been building this union of sorts in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so today there's no point in talking about our commitment to higher education. That's something that has been proven time and again. I think that we can take that as a given. We see this as a public good and as a social good. So it's not just a public good, but also a social good. And what are the obligations that fall on the state? I am the political senior official who's in charge of this, in charge of the policies. And we're not just talking about public universities. We're talking about our commitment for institutes of higher learning that are also under private management. I think that we all realize that the concept of higher education is something that goes far beyond universities, the formal public universities that are funded out of central government funds or federal funds, depending on the government structure or state structure in each one of our countries. But in any event, I'm sure that we're all on the same wavelength here. And if you have anything that you'd like to, that you want to show that illustrates our unity, we are convinced that there are many things that we have in common. But sometimes, we've seen this in the past in Latin America and Central America and the Caribbean, and often those of us in Argentinians take us a long time to learn from our analysis. But we have to take all of that and translate it into concrete policy recommendations to ensure university autonomy so that that becomes a reality more and more. And of course, along with that, we have other concepts that in Argentina are very important to us, very dear to our hearts. That is a free access to higher education, no education for payment. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about one specific point, and I would say that it's our commitment in the university community. Not just the commitment to education, but also our commitment to research. And I'm sure other panelists will have things to say about that. But mostly, I would like to stress the importance of the role that higher education plays in society at large. Higher education is part and parcel of society. We're not up in an ivory towers. You know, in many countries, we have different ways of talking about how to manage growth in universities and higher education. How can we make it possible for there to be more outreach? In a way, saying it or defining it in those terms, outreach makes it sound as if we weren't actually involved in society, and yet we are. So when we're involved in our outreach work, we have to move outside the lecture halls, band together with other partners around the globe. We're all definitely very local and also very global. And this plays in our favor across Latin America and the Caribbean. When we have this critical tension in which we interact with society, we dialogue with society, and we learn from that experience. We go back to universities and we carry out research, or we relearn things that have been lost. In any event, that is one of the most important things that higher education institutions play. It's not just enough to recite to the letter the textbooks that were handed down from a given historical and knowledge tradition of Western Europe. I think that when we examine the linkages between higher education and outreach, there's no doubt, and there are many differences from one country to the next, but there's no doubt that we are part and parcel. We are interwoven into the social fabric. So this is something that's part of our approach in Argentina. Now, we know that people often talk about free higher education, and they say, but people who are going there, they're not paying for that. Well, no, everybody's paying. We pay for it out of our taxes. And because it's offered free of tuition fees for learners, we believe that that is the best way that we can ensure that higher institutes or institutes of higher learning will continue to play that social role. So in Latin America, in Central America, all of these ideas have been mainstreamed. I think we all agree with this, and we're just trying to do everything we can to roll out successful policies. I'm not just talking about, of course, teachers and students. I'm very pleased to see that we have representatives of unions here. We are a community that's part of a commonwealth, and everybody's working together. We can represent the rights of many different groups, teachers, students, non-teaching staff, unions. And again, when we talk about outreach and working with the society, this is something that doesn't just apply to teachers and learners, but also to the non-teaching members of the university community. So that's my 5 minutes. They're up. Thank you, Oscar. I'll take advantage of the fact that you were referring to the presence here today of not just higher education institutes and governments, but also other representatives of people from the world of academia and the representatives of employees, students, faculty. That illustrates this very rich orchestra of voices that we have in our choir of higher education. Of course, we all have differences, but it's because of adapting and changing into change that we make progress. I'll now give the floor to the president of the National University of Colombia, Dolly Montoya Castaña. She's also the president of the University of Latin American and Caribbean Universities, UDUAL. It's a network that requires to know introduction. And so, Madam Dean, I would like to give you the floor, and we're very grateful to all that you've been doing within Udual. Thank you, Felix, and also thank you to all of the organizers that have made it possible for us to gather here today. Warm greetings to all of those here in the room with us today, all of the leaders at regional level. It's really a challenge for us to be sitting here in the spotlight, trying to talk about something that you're also conversant with. I wanted to touch on one important point, and that is the future of higher education, as we see in the title of this panel discussion. We have to build on what's already there. If we want to do what the minister was just saying, working together, I always say that we have to be humble in order to be able to remain agile and flexible in order to work with our differences and add layers on layers of positive work. As Gramsci, the Italian theorist, said, we have to create the conditions so that what we hope will happen. So the future, in fact, begins today. It doesn't begin tomorrow, because what we do today is going to have an impact on what comes tomorrow. It's a huge responsibility. And we all know this because of our own experience. So it's a great opportunity to take some time to think about how this will play out in each one of our countries. And in Iberoamerica, we have to have our own specific look at this. We've said this in many other fora. We have to try to understand why people go into institutes of higher education. Who are they? What do they want? Higher education should create an atmosphere or atmospheres so that all of these different people can actually take their life project and make it happen. This is very important. And instead of spending all this time talking about how we should be organizing our own efforts, no, we should be focusing on how we can create that atmosphere that is so empowering for today's youth. Another important point is that there are traditional universities that were based over and created their reputations over many, many decades and centuries, and they've got their own traditions. But then there are all the new universities out there, new universities that are playing critical functions in many countries at national level, regional level, provincial level. And this is a vital part of the system as well. So it's up to us in each one of our countries to try to how we can have greater integration of all of this, not to create some sort of monolithic approach. We're not trying to just copy the development of the developed countries as we've done for far too long. We have our own way of envisioning growth and projecting ourselves into the future. And we don't have to be identical either. There's a very important feature that we should all be mindful of, and that in every one of our universities, in these new universities, we should be thinking about things such as creating an institutional culture that's based on notions of equality, where the government actually defines its institutional culture and working practices, and all of this should be quality-oriented. This means that there's to be constant self-critique. It's the only way to improve and grow. Not to grow to imitate others, but to grow organically on the basis of one's own overarching objectives so that you can actually create this institutional culture that flourishes and makes it possible for everything that grows within that culture to flourish. We have to continue gaining more and more experience in all of these different areas. And one important thing about education, one of the best things is evaluation, is assessment. And I don't think we have a thorough understanding of that. It's very different from just grading and getting, scoring, marking exams is in a way impunitive. I'm talking about something else where we can make it possible for learners to feel completely fulfilled, and not so that they're being grade-oriented. No, they are actually enjoying the learning process and they're enriching themselves. All of us here probably have graduated from universities. Well, we have to evaluate all of the groups that we're setting up, how we're going to be growing. We have to be mindful of institutional arrangements, the institutional culture, as I said, and we have to think about the overarching organization of all of these different activities. constant self-evaluation and constant improvement, that is the common thread in everything that we do. This means that everybody improves, but we're not going to be identical. We can emulate one another, but we'll be, as a result of all of this, developing public and private policies and approaches that will create this healthier academic ecosystem. It's very important, however, to remember the fact that this cannot happen if there's not a sound policy that has been designed to make it possible for higher education to be funded. This can only happen if, at national level, and all of us here are the leaders of our education policy in our country, we can do everything in our power to create the kind of atmosphere and environment that will foster lifelong opportunities for everybody in society. I hope I haven't gone over my speaking time. Did I keep within my speaking time? Thank you, Felix. No, again, focusing on all of us speaking or singing from the same score in choir. Now, from a network of one universities to another, I would like to ask Sandra Almeida, the Dean of the Association of the Montevideo Group Universities. And again, your organization requires no presentation either. This is a network that is involved in intense cooperation amongst all of its member universities. So I would like to thank you, Madam Rector, for your attendance here, for all of the work that you've put into the Iberoamerican knowledge space. Thank you, Felix. I'm going to be speaking in Portuguese, and I will speak slowly so that you can follow along with what I'm saying, but this is what Felix asked me to do. I would like to begin by saying that there is a large amount of demands for Iberoamerican knowledge space. And when we talk about this, language is important. And the interaction between us in the languages that we speak is what makes us who we are and how we understand the world. I myself am a linguist and a professor of literature, so I'm very careful about the words that I use. And this conference focuses a lot on the use of language, the use of words. As Dolly was just saying, she was quite right to say this, we're talking about things that we all agree upon. And yet, we are also here to put our heads together and try to imagine the futures of higher education. And I love the fact that it's in the plural, the futures of higher education, because there are myriad possible futures, and we will build those futures together. And I think that it's very important to bear in mind just how important words are. And that's why I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak in my own language. Now I could speak in English or I could speak in Spanish, but there's nothing quite like speaking in one's own native tongue. It's not the same as speaking a foreign language, the language of the other. And I think that this is one of the added values of Iberoamerican knowledge space. We share a common history, a history that hasn't always been rosy or serene, but it is also a space for cooperation, where our languages, where we share our languages, we can speak about a common culture, a common starting point, some fundamentals that we all share, and other issues that are of great importance to our countries and to our societies. And I think that that's what we mean when we're talking about the Iberoamerican knowledge space. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, an indigenous leader in Brazil said to me, I'll never forget the words he said, we cannot get out of this pandemic and go back to the way things were before. Going back to normalcy to a certain extent would be a way of forgetting everything that we've undergone, forgotten all of those who perished, and sometimes just because of a lack of cooperation and solidarity in our societies. So It's very important. If we're talking about the futures of higher education, it's important for us to be aware of the fact that said futures will only exist if we cooperate with one another and help one another protect ourselves. With masks, it's one way of protecting ourselves and others. And this is the best way for us to move forward as a country and as a community. I would just like to refer to something that I heard yesterday during the opening ceremony. We've heard a lot of talk about the future of higher education. How can we build this future? And yet, there's one thing that wasn't mentioned, but our secretary did mention this, and that is the importance of people. Who will be the architects of the futures of higher education? It will not be the institutions alone, that's for sure. We can focus on our institutions and our universities, and that's something that we have to do, but we will not be working alone. Governments have a key role to play. We won't be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without investments, sustained investments over the long haul in our institutions. Dolly was quite right to stress that point. And we won't be able to build these futures without thinking about those who will actually be there in the future, our students, our youth. So if we're going to do teaching, research, and we try to divulge knowledge and spread it far and wide in our societies, we have to work with all stakeholders. We have to think about higher education as a common good, something that is held in common. As Marco Antonio Diaz said, that if we're talking about common goods, this means that the public at large has to bear this responsibility that it doesn't really have. No, common good means that it's something that is a good for all, and it's up to the government. The government has the responsibility to make sure that this is preserved. It can never be turned into merchandise. Professor Antonio yesterday said, not for profit. This cannot be for profit. Now, of course, private corporations do have an important role to play, and we cannot think of higher education as being there only to serve the marketplace. Higher education, after all, is the very foundation upon which the future of our youth will be built. I would like to conclude with something that Dolly said. The future is now. And one philosopher said there are no different tenses, the past, the present, the future. We have the present and things behind us. That's the memory that helps us to build the present and the future. But the only thing that really exists is the future. The present of the present is what we see, our attitude towards our contemporary times in order to avoid making the mistakes of the past. But the future represents our hopes. Thank you very much, Sandra.
¿Entiende? Portugués.
Claro.
No, además es que efectivamente es una conversación que tuvimos.
Did you understand my Portuguese? Yes, we were speaking about this the other day, and I would like to thank you for speaking Portuguese, because I also believe that this space must also be characterized by the free use of everyone's language. We are fortunate enough to have a linguistic family where languages are understood. So thank you very much. And the reference to words and to terminology, I would now like to ask the Dean of the University of Havana to take the floor. Miriam Ricardo, who has a lot of experience not only in university but also in the social realm. We have also had an opportunity to listen to you in a meeting last Monday and Tuesday, and it is also a pleasure to listen to you today. Thank you very much, Felix, and thank you all for being here with us. We're talking about the Iberian American space and the future of higher education. And I thought that the future of higher education will very much depend on how governments invest in it. And I say this because the problems to be solved by higher education should always depend on the problems that are found in one's country. So this is why we are working thoroughly in a governance system based on science and innovation. To us, this means more than anything else to determine where the unsolved problems lie, and in them, where the experts in our universities are. And these experts should go beyond the frontiers of our countries and should go to the places where society needs solution for these problems. So I think that we have to strengthen universities, and a university becomes richer when there is a social, political, or economic problem. And perhaps this problem cannot be solved explicitly at that point in time, but they're solved by universities together. So as we see it, higher education, more than one university or a group of universities, higher education is a process in which we have several actors involved, not only university, but also society at large, so that the proposals for working can be strengthened in universities. To us, it's been a pleasure, and I say this because the pandemic was very harsh, very difficult, but it was also a period where universities could make a contribution, and citizens saw the solution for their problems in universities. We have been working for many years to obtain the use of platforms, but we had never had before the ability to serve the public as we did during the pandemic. And this happened because the governments asked, where are the scientific results in universities? And if they were there, how were they to be applied? And this could be valid to all of the Sustainable Development Goals. Where are the main results in Iberian America that can help us resolve the energy problems in our countries? In an Argentinian, Colombian, or Brazilian universities, we experts all together should unite ourselves and solve the energy problems of Latin America as a single team. Where are the medical problems of our countries? Where are the main scientists? Let us all unite. And since we are a space of knowledge, together we are going to solve these problems in our country. So I see this more than anything else as a space of cooperation, as a space of mutual respect, understanding, love and cooperation between our universities. I think I went on for a little long, but thank you very much for this opportunity for conveying to you our experience. Thank you very much. All of you have been very punctual in your interventions. So to wrap up this first part, we are also going to move on to conclusions. But before that, I would like to give the floor to the Subsecretary of Higher Education of Mexico, Mr. Luciano Concheiro. And after he speaks, we will open for questions. I've been taking a few notes that we can discuss later on. Good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to greet my fellow panelists, and I'd like to start by asking ourselves in this dialogue, what is the moment we are living through? What is it like? And this is a period that comes after the pandemic. And I am talking about a period where we got like suspended in time. So this can be a present, but it is like a suspended present. This is not a poetic play of words, but actually a breakdown with global proportions. And Dolly asked a very pertinent question. Can we go back to normalcy? To what normalcy? To the normalcy that brought us here, to the pandemic? Do we want to reproduce normalcy just by making a few adjustments to education? Or, as recently we said in a recent meeting in the Dominican Republic, to shake the tree, as they say there, so that this takes a different route. And I think that we have a turning point in civilization. So we would like to question the whole system of our higher education institutions, the sense of university. And then we can think about the recovery of main tendencies or going back to certain elements. So there is no time. Our colonial pasts and also pre-Columbian pasts in our country make themselves present in a radically different way to each of us. The decolonization process is very important. And in this society at crisis should lead us to a change of rehumanization, to a different order, where societies were not cooperative. So this is the result of something which is a main component of our current situation. Our states had traits of welfare states, and we had this necro policy, who lives and who dies. This is a central element of the system to which we are going to go back to very quickly, so it seems, because we haven't even attempted to change the environmental principles that brought us here, the destruction of nature, not to speak about a way out of it. So I think that we are facing a crisis of humanity, and this crisis should lead us to thinking about possible futures in these tough times, because it's not just a time in a developed linear society. These are times where colonial elements are always present. Brazil, slavery, Mexico, with all of the servitude conditions, is Mexico that is built based on an utilitarian utilitarian vision of university. It is a human right, the right to education. So we are before a problem that has to be faced as such. We have to face it today in such a way where we make possible not only the right to schooling and to remain in the school, but there's also something that is fundamental to fight inequalities of gender, sex, ethnic, surmount conditions where inequalities manifest themselves. We have to fight them. But we also have to recover the sense of autonomy that has been mentioned here. And this is not administrative autonomy. It is not an element of governance, I'm sorry. It is a commitment with society. This dates back to 1918 in Cordoba, Argentina. It is not an autonomy to be administrative independent inside, but autonomy to make a commitment to be part of society. This is the great transformation that was proposed by Cordoba, not a different one. And I would say that today the central requirement is more present than ever. And everything that was mentioned here comes from this idea. This is not merchandise. And we have to build a public policy that is also social and not common, but a community policy. Because the issue of subjects, and here I go back to the importance of words, our policies are what they should have done, should have been. And we should build subjects for social transformation. I think that our universities play a fundamental role in facing the appropriation of indigenous societies, and also for radically finding the sustainability something much more important from the point of view of diversity, the diversity that leads to compatibility, cultural compatibility. And here we have to face up to a perspective where the word university also covers the idea of universe. So in this dialogue of knowledge and confrontation of ideas, there are societies that build their thinking not in an ontologic way, like Brazil and different indigenous groups, and also in Mexico, where there is no distinction between subjective or objective. If construction is not whole, integral, if this does prove true, we should question the role of university. We cannot be just aside. We cannot say, we have to change the way in which we communicate, or the dichotomy, is it on-site or is it remote? This should not be our main concern. We shouldn't be talking about the technical issues just. I think we should be speaking about the rehumanization, the construction of a possible universe. And so I am not contradicting myself. It is a possible universe in diversity and not in homogeneity, as has been pointed out before. And I close this first intervention with a concept that came out the other day which is crucial, which is the idea of solidarity's internationalization. Solidarity sometimes is meant to be giving to the poor, but this has nothing to do. It means reciprocity, giving without waiting for anything or expecting anything in return, fraternity, brotherhood, and a radically construction effort that is based in this idea of university. It has to be a diverse university. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Luciano, for your words and for helping the moderator. And now we open for questions, following the same order that we had in the first part. So I'd like to ask you, Oscar, about a specific point, which is the immediate route. Often in this meeting in Barcelona, we know that this is a conference where we notice that things were not did not reach an end or an objective. So we should use this opportunity to try and resolve this. And Argentina has an additional responsibility in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is the presidency of CELAC. There's the University of Cordoba initiative, and also the initiative of the University of Santiago de Compostela. So how does the Argentinian government sees this route that is ahead of us? Yes, Felix, thank you. And Luciano also spoke about this. We have started stipulating an agenda for the future. So it's not just what we're doing here. There are many things that will make us shake the trees or the forest. And we are also talking about governmental representation. And in the association, we spoke about working together. But we know that this is a reality not just of universities, as Luciano was saying, with this social commitment, but it also falls on governments that allow the university system to grow. And if this is not taking place, we should make it do so. 4 years ago, we had infrastructure work going on, and there were things that should have been, or funds that should have been sent to universities, $25 million, and the budget was not approved. So these are policies that we have to work on and think about and to assure altogether. And we have to provide continuity to all this. So I would like to invite you to Cordoba the 30th of June and 1st of July. We stipulated several objectives, as we should do here too. In Latin America and Central America, we should try and see how we are doing vis-a-vis these objectives. What have we reached and what should be changed, as Luciano said. We have Santiago de Compostela and also Mar del Plata. These will also be opportunities for us to meet. And we can travel physically and also work remotely. But I think that physical presence allows for more fluid communication. And I think that the commitment we have to make is not with a declaration or not just a declaration. We have to make a declaration and not just be here and to come out of this meeting very happily, but to provide continuity to the process. So we have representatives of these associations that do it on a daily basis, but we have to go on working together because the issue of the marketability of a good is pertinent. This conference started with banks, which are no longer here, but this is important, and this is true, and this drew my attention. But I think that it is okay that we work on this. Otherwise, one day we will look back and see that everything changed. So we have to keep on shaking the trees in the forest. We have to make a social commitment, and also states have to do their part in terms of universal rights. Otherwise, we will lose autonomy. But if there's no funding, there will be no autonomy. So the commitment, and we would like to reinforce this invitation, 30th of June and 1st of July in Quarterback, to keep on talking, and also Mar del Plata from the 15th to the 18th. Well, thank you very much. So we have the next steps on this route duly taken note of. And now, Mrs. Montoya, can you go back to what you said before? Sandra and herself agreed on what has to be done. I was also very interested in what you said about focusing on young people. So I would like to ask you your views. What do you think would be the actions that universities should take forward so that they focus more on the young people that go through university? Thank you very much, Felix. This has been repeated so many times too. Our higher purpose as a university, it could be said, is to graduate whole human beings as students. And there is corruption in many of our countries, at least in Colombia. This is very prevalent, and this can be fought with education. Education to make youngsters whole beings with social awareness, with citizenship behavior, and with important pedagogies which are work and collaborative work. And this is what we try to teach: collaborative work and work in a context. Allows us to teach our students not just to read and write. Language and what we say is becoming increasingly important, but also how we can truly communicate. This is important. That is, if we have young people who are educated for making progress in social problems, it has to be for that, because the collaborative work and work in a context is meant to provide freedom to our youngsters so that they can perform in their professions, occupations, or field of knowledge. So if they become leaders, and if we manage to form constructive leaders that are used to working together. This is how we're going to change this. Instead of waiting for some messiahs or the president for solving the problems of the world, we have to empower them. We have to be educated to be a good human being, to serve society and not just to make money, etc. And this fights corruption. And we have to start with primary and secondary education, because we see what has gone on around the world at different levels, but this can be fought by forming citizens to serve society so that we can change these conditions. So this is fundamental work. And if teachers work in communities, we have indicators in Latin American universities and in Central America or the Caribbean, as we're mentioning here. We have performed a survey and noticed that we have fundamental problems in qualifying students, but we also have indicators that are not taken into account by international ranking. And this is a duty of Latin American universities, especially those that are more traditional, that can respond more quickly to problems that may occur, like a fallen bridge or whatever crisis that happen in our countries. If there are problems like this, people resort to the universities of Mexico or Colombia, because those are the ones that can respond to these crises, or Sao Paulo, or any traditional university that have this flexibility to respond to these nationwide problems. So we organize committees. There are 113 indicators about what we do in Latin American universities, which are not contemplated by international rankings. And we have to make this work visible, just like language, because we are different. We have to devote ourselves to solve problems, and of course, society should be in charge of that. And if we have the proper funding, we have to respond. Universities are funded by the taxes paid by taxpayers in our countries, but I think that it doesn't matter if education is on-site, remote, hybrid, public or private. What is important is to be a whole citizen that can understand themselves as such and serve society. And I think that this is a crucial point we should work upon, because this is what we want in the end, the development of human beings. And so this is not an option. We are here not to suffer, but rather to be happy.
Muchas gracias, Dolly.
Thank you very much, Dolly, for that excellent summary and recap. Sandra, I would like to go back to the words we use, because I personally agree with many of the things that you've referred to. I see it in international and multilateral fora. Words, the language that we use in our statements, have great weight. Whenever there's a change or a shift in language, what we should be thinking first is that there is some intentionality behind that. If the language is changing, it's because it means something different. And it's not just a question of aesthetics. It reflects a deeper change. When we think about all of the people who are our heroes, the people that we really admire. But how do we protect words? What do you think we can or should do in our region in order to continue to protect words, not for the word's sake, but because they stand for certain perspectives, certain values, and so that they cannot be somehow distorted. That's an issue that is very much in the contemporary scene. Well, we often start to ask questions about how our minds work. As Dolly said, I say this to my students. If during a session in a classroom and you are reading a newspaper article but with your critical thinking cap on, well, you have to talk about this with the teacher. Critical reading skills should be taught everywhere. And you should also learn how to read between the lines. And that is our role here as participants in this World Conference on Higher Education to think about all of this. We should be very mindful of the language we use. We have a document whose words will lead us to induce change in our behavior. Words have power. Words do act. They are, by designating something, by saying that higher education is a common good, well, that means that we shall act accordingly. We say that the public is responsible for higher education. And we also say that universities are in society's better interest. By creating these various linguistic spaces, this is the best way to guarantee and shore up public policies. There's always a risk of the underlying meaning of words shifting somehow and slipping away from us. Let me just mention one example. I was recently participating in an international webinar, and we were talking about international education. And I said, well, does this mean that it's national education instead of international higher education? Why should we be talking about international education as opposed to something that would simply be universal? So I think we have to be careful and pay attention to all of the words. The expression common good, global good. Higher education is a global good. That means something else. When we talk about globalization, we mustn't forget the entire colonial heritage that's come before. So we have to be very careful whenever we hear the words global, globalization. If we have a roadmap, and we're going to develop a roadmap, well, we have to be thinking about some of the words we're going to use on the signposts along the way. There are some words that are actually twisted and wind up meaning the exact opposite of what we want to do. So we should be very conscious of the language that we use, the words that we use. We have to be very critical about the way we use language. Paulo Freire said it so well. We cannot change society. We can change individuals. And for those people afterwards, then change society. And why would we do that? Well, we should be seeking to do this through quality education, of course, but one that is inclusive, that is respectful of differences. Education that gives people their full citizens' rights, and education that gives people the space to think on their own. And it's a responsibility that we all share, not just the students, not just the teachers, all of us. And we should always be mindful of the historical weight of language and the words we use. One other thing that I would like to mention that's very important, and this also merits further reflection. Those of us who are attending this World Conference on Higher Education, those of us who have come from Latin America, well, we know that Latin America is the region in the world where higher education is, in fact, is tied in and has dialogue with the society in where the universities are situated. You don't see many other places in the world where universities are so actively engaged in the local community. And that's something that is a huge plus in our favor. It's really that unique. And we've been doing this for quite some time. It's great for us to be aware of this. Santos, a famous Portuguese, had already thought of this. We are engaged in dialogue with the societies and where we are. We do this by being involved in research projects in the service of society at large. The pandemic has borne this out. So we should celebrate this. We, in the network of Latin American universities, we all have deep local roots. In fact, it's part of our DNA. We are engaged working with local society, with the local community, on all of the things that we do. Education, teaching, research, all of that is all interwoven with our role in society. It's something that we have already been doing for a long time, and I think that we can do even more and leverage within the framework of the Iberoamerican knowledge community. Something that is a common thread: teaching, education, and research, working closely with society. Thank you, Sandra. I'm now going to go give the floor to Miriam Nicado. She said something about how universities actually rise to the challenge and are very resilient. It's in a way in which universities, the scientific community, whenever there's a big crunch, humanity had to face this pandemic, and universities were there. And I think societies are very aware of all of a sudden just how important universities are, and universities also became aware of their own importance in society. So obviously, things can't go back to the way they were before. This is something that others have said. So, Miriam, what do you think we should do for this to be a permanent capacity that we've got, so that all of this experience doesn't just get lost in oblivion? I get the impression as time goes by, we tend to want to wipe the slate clean. And yet, the ways in which universities have proven their agility and their role to society, the important role they play, that's something that shouldn't be squandered. We should never lose sight of just how important universities are to society and the function that they play in society. Miriam, what do you have to say on that? Well, I would say that from our perspective, when the pandemic hit, we had many things that we were going to have to do, and we saw this across the entire region, not just in Cuba, of course. But we did this because perhaps we don't have these practices that we are engaged in every single day. But the practice does exist. It all depends on the kinds of challenges that you have to address. Sometimes I think that we tend to downplay ourselves. In Latin America, it deserves a much higher regard of what we actually achieve. We have excellent scientists, not just in Cuba, and practically all Latin American universities. We have excellent educators. And we also have excellent young people. And these young people, these teachers, these scientists, every day they are facing many challenges. And all of a sudden, the pandemic appeared. And that was a major challenge. But tomorrow will bring further challenges. And these further challenges and how we manage them depends on the experience that went before. The leaders of the universities and whatever social issues that have to be addressed. Let me just mention one example. In Cuba, the pandemic differentiated amongst all of us, right? And some of these differences are due to external causes, others to internal causes. But the role of the scientist should be to pinpoint vulnerable spots in order to address those vulnerabilities and to make improvements. Now, I think these vulnerabilities can be found in any country, in any sector. And just to go back to your question, that really is my view. The university can never be held back. Universities have to be constantly moving, evolving. And the day that a university stops growing, well, it dies. And I think that what we can say in Latin America is that we've always had very lively universities.
Muchas gracias, Miriam. Y finalmente, Luciano.
Thank you very much, Miriam and Luciano. I think that we have discussed a very interesting topic here, and I'd like to go back to it. We are a society, but we are also the state, and university responds to national issues. But we were talking about this in terms of challenges, to put it very simply. We have a role of promoting transformation with possible projects of possible utopias. This is not the sense of a university nowadays. I think that the focal point is to expand the state, and this idea of an expanded state is what we lack today, not just a well-being state, not just for the good of society, but for nature, although this may sound contradictory to the ears of some. So the central point of what an expanded state would be, based on the role of universities as those who build citizenship in communities, but that is also nationwide, and that is also citizenship that covers the whole world, of bringing us together in this world. And I think that we have to go back to this role in developing our own institutions. Contradictory developments. There was 1968. Sometimes we had these phenomena in different countries in 67, but it was a movement around the world that questioned democracy and how to build a reciprocal solidarity. So if we want to fulfill the purpose of doing this all over America, and Iberian America, together with Andorra, what we are considering is a possible world that can lead to major ruptures in terms of how we face our role of societies and of a state, and how we can change citizenship to one that is humane, that makes us face up to the responsibilities in our surroundings, our communities, and our countries too, because the sense of country also exists. A country that has 3,200 kilometers of a borderline with the empire, where we lost half of the country, quote unquote, because hegemony is also based on language, on building a language which is not enough to make us recognize ourselves in our own countries. And this language is no longer present in our constitution as an agreed upon official language. There is no official language in Mexico today. What we have is diversity, and we now acknowledge this rupture. So I think that we are dealing with something that goes way beyond ourselves. And I fully agree with the fact that the pandemic changed us, our potentials, but also exposed human misery, the violence inside our institutions, especially gender violence. University is not made possible if gender violence is still prevalent. We cannot have a university in a country where 8% of the population speaks languages other than Spanish, and in Mexican universities, we only have 2% of people from the First Nations. And so inequity turns into denying your very condition as a possible country, and in solving your colonial problems. You can only solve this inside universities. There's also the evolution of our trade unions, which had a project of a university, and academic work turned into a different kind of trade unionism. So we have to turn our institutions in our America, as José Martí would say, we have to turn them into something else, to give them a new role in the sea of contradictions in our institutions, which are multiple institutions. We have to acknowledge them with their contradictions. So this is not just a progressive or dichotomic posture. It is refounding these institutions in a civilizatory way, so to speak. So our time is a bit short. At 11 o'clock, there will be a different session starting here, so let us make the most. So we have the last comments. The microphone is not on. The speaker cannot be heard properly. I apologize. Now, we bring the messages of each of you. We would have enough material for this World Conference. Although there is a Iberian-American approach, this also reflects the rest of the world. Tomorrow we have the closing, 1,500 people, 200 deans and so on. Have you been consulted upon about the route that is going to be presented by UNESCO tomorrow? And here I ask, those people who are present here, Mexico, Cuba, CELAC, what is the route that we are talking about? What kind of education are we talking about? Is this university versus university or UNESCO versus education? I think not, but we will see. because we have not been consulted upon yet. And this question goes to our dear friend Felix, because we Iberian Americans actually feel Latin Americans. So this approach is valid for Europe, for Africa, because no institutions, or there are several institutions that have not been heard in UNESCO. So Spain give UNESCO the money to hold this event. And what about the route to follow? Tomorrow we will hear that 1,500 participants and hundreds of deans and so on will be part of a list. So we're talking about a participation, but what kind of participation? Marcelo Danice had asked for the floor. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Felix, for all of the leadership role that you have been playing in our Iberian American universities. I agree with much of what was said here. Two comments. First, we talk about education, university and higher education as a social good and right. And we also discussed social inclusion in university, that all kinds of sectors have to have access, even in our country, where university is for free, but we know that it is a lot more difficult for some to have access. And I think that we know about the possibility of having a better job and social ascension that one enjoys after going through university. But this has to be part of a collective phenomenon. I think that we are a fairer institution if everybody is committed to social development. And I think that what we are saying here is that university should not depend just on us alone. It should depend on the whole of society. And the involvement of states is very important. And lastly, as a university trade unionist, we are university workers, those who are teachers and those who are not. I think that Iberian America also has a role to play, not only in defending our work conditions and wages, but also diversity. And workers have to be involved. We are those who take the policies of universities forward, and we have to be committed with development and with everything that is being discussed here. We have to think of what is going to come out of this meeting. And of course, we have a very important role to play with the results of this year. And we also have to go back to what will go on in Cordoba, organized by Felix. So we have to go on working and building this process of making Iberian America democratic. Thank you very much. Now, Carmen.
Carmen, luego Villarruy, sí, luego también.
Bueno, le voy a ceder el micrófono a mi compañero en realidad.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Hector Rodriba. We're from the Global Students Forum. It's a world organization that brings together all of the student organizations at regional level from across the globe. Now, we all know the role that students have in different countries and student organizations, what their role is. But the question to you is, what role do you see for students and democratic structures for student representation in the futures of building this Iberoamerican knowledge space? Thank you. Well, I would say that I forgot that somebody up here had asked for the floor too. Terribly sorry, I skipped somebody. Okay, we can continue. We can hear from Ruiz, Rui, Axel, Calvo Alvarado. We can see you, but the problem is that they're going to have to kick us out of the room. We're running out of time. We shall hang in there. I'm from the Iberoamerican University Foundation. I'm a research director for European projects. I'm a European in Latin America and a Latin American when I'm in Europe. As a Latin American in Europe, I can say that I miss Latin America a great deal. I'm very grateful to hear all of the encouraging news that I hear. Often we kind of unfortunately forget about what's going on in Latin America and Europe. But I just have one thought that I'd like to share with you and then a question. In the European knowledge space, a lot of research is being done through Erasmus Plus and other policies that have been devised. And my experience there sees that from the European standpoint, these spaces are very useful, not just for European universities, but also for Latin American universities and African universities. There's a lot of cooperation, and this is the type of vehicle that we can leverage to continue developing together. And I'm not talking about just a copy-paste thing, but just more cross-continent cooperation, and to think about higher education as something that knows no borders. I truly believe in an international cooperation of universities across the globe based on mutual respect and this sense of being deeply rooted in the local community. It's true, words certainly have their weight. The other speakers have mentioned this, and Rodolfo Coruch from Argentina said that words were so important. So what kind of cooperation do you envisage? In what way could it work together with the European research community? That's basically what I'm talking about. And also in Europe, we have a large amount of student mobility. And this picks up on what one of the student representatives just said. So are you starting to think about cooperation programs amongst Latin American universities where Latin American students can have that same type of mobility with recognized credential systems, etc.?
Sí.
Era eso. No, en medio por ahí.
No. We have to stop at 11. You know that we've got to cram a lot of different things into a very short amount of time. And it's on behalf of the organizations that I represent, the non-teaching staff union. We've been focusing on item 11.11. Felix helped us a lot. We wanted there to be mention made of the interests and the rights of all of the people working in higher education and universities. And so that was just one of the things that I just wanted to go on record in stating. Okay, thank you. Yes, we'd like everybody to get a chance to speak.
¿Se ha terminado el tiempo? ¿Qué hacemos ahora? ¿Nos movilizamos en la entrada? Sí.
Allá también.
Sí, por lo menos una.
This is the end of interpretation time. The interpreters need a break because we're going to be resuming after this for the next session. So the interpreters are going offline.
Ser muito rápido, muito breve. Eu quero dizer que eu estou aqui como parte de Enlaces e me sinto representado pelos membros da mesa, porque todos fazem parte do Enlaces também. Gostei muito da menção ao 11º ponto, trabalho decente na universidade, que o Enlaces incorporou a sua proposição para essa conferência. E lastimo que ela não tenha sido levada em consideração pela Unesco. Quero dizer que ouvi muito atentamente a reitora de Havana e dizer que, ao longo desse processo de construção das proposições do Enlace, sempre se diz, mas Cuba é um caso particular. Não? Porém, há uma mensagem que ela deixou aqui hoje, que é uma mensagem compartilhada por muitos. As universidades que nós queremos para o futuro eu falo da América Latina e Caribe, são universidades que necessariamente têm que ter pertinência, têm que pertencer à sociedade, têm que, com a sociedade, ser orgânicas. E a Covid mostrou isso. Quando nós fomos orgânicos, nós nos tornamos legítimos. E é isso a mensagem que se passa aqui. Então, muito importante isso, apesar de todas as limitações que o Telêmaco mostra, que nós estamos muito preocupados e temos que nos mobilizar para que amanhã possamos realmente fazer com que as pequenas palavras, reitora Sandra, e as mensagens ocultas não venham a colocar em risco toda a luta que nós temos pela educação superior. E quero mencionar aqui, não sei se terá tempo, a presença dos estudantes. Não? Se falou aqui de Córdoba, 1917. Não? Os estudantes deveriam, estar à mesa, com certeza. E lembrar que eu tenho aqui a presidenta da União Nacional dos Estudantes, a maior e mais histórica representação de estudantes do Brasil. Bruna, por favor.
Obrigada, professor Rui. Agradeço aqui o espaço. Me permitam falar português, porque meu portunhol é bem difícil. Eu sou a Bruna Brelais, sou estudante brasileira, sou presidente da União Nacional dos Estudantes. É uma entidade que tem quase 85 anos. Nós costumamos dizer que os 85 anos da UNE se confundem também com a história da democracia brasileira. E eu nasci no coração da Amazônia do Brasil, sou do estado do Amazonas, portanto, a primeira a assumir a presidência da UNE nesse sentido. Eu queria reforçar aqui algumas premissas importantes para os estudantes brasileiros. Todos e todas vocês devem acompanhar a crise econômica, social, educacional que o nosso país vive. E nós não podemos perder a oportunidade desses espaços para denunciar e dizer o que os estudantes brasileiros defendem para a educação e para o ensino superior. Nesse sentido, existem alguns princípios importantes que nós consideramos como a autonomia universitária, como o orçamento das universidades, como a garantia do acesso e permanência dos estudantes, como uma primícia de desenvolvimento nacional. Porque os estudantes brasileiros defendem hoje é que a universidade é um instrumento importante para a soberania dos nossos povos, para a garantia de um desenvolvimento sustentável. E isso está entrelaçado com a pluralidade, com a popularização do ensino superior. Portanto, a nossa defesa para que os mais pobres, para que indígenas, para que os negros, para quilombolas acessem o ensino superior, não é somente por uma questão de reparação histórica, por conta da história do Brasil e por conta do processo tão bruto que o Brasil, o nosso país, viveu, mas também porque nós acreditamos que o processo de ensino, pesquisa e extensão precisa estar atrelado a essas pessoas. A formulação, o desenvolvimento de pesquisa precisa estar atrelado a essas pessoas. Essas pessoas têm muito a contribuir com as universidades. Então, como eu disse no início aqui, se existe uma crise que acontece no Brasil, na América Latina, que precisa ser superada, o caminho é a educação, é a defesa da educação, é a defesa da universidade no seu princípio público, na sua garantia de fortalecimento e no desenvolvimento dos nossos povos. Portanto, reforço aqui a necessidade de que, em outros espaços, nós possamos garantir que mais estudantes possam estar representados, possam participar para dar nossa contribuição de forma maior e qualitativa. Muito obrigada a todos e a todas.
Pues muchas gracias. Con esto terminaríamos, yo creo. A ver, a mí me gustaría mucho seguir. Siento un gran pesar porque Roberto Escalante me pidió la palabra, Axel Didrikson, Carlos Alvarado, allá también el compañero, pero hay otra actividad que sigue ahora aquí a esta hora. Yo les animo a que nos tomemos un café juntos quienes quieran y puedan. Y por supuesto seguimos, ¿no? Muchas gracias a la representante de estudiantes. Yo creo que todos nos sentimos identificados en sus palabras. Muchas gracias a los ponentes, a todos ustedes. Y seguimos. Gracias.